Welcome to the Michigan Man Podcast on Wolverine Sports Radio, a member of the V Sporto Network, and in partnership with SB Nation's Maize and Brew, for Wolverine fans from coast to coast.
Go Blue, and welcome to the show. I'm your host, Mike Fitzpatrick. The spring game is coming up on Saturday, and joining us this week to discuss that and more is beat writer Aaron McMann from MLive. First, a few of my thoughts to get us going. The beat writers have had access to coaches and players all spring, but they haven't seen any live action from practice. Don't put too much into what you see this Saturday either. The spring game is another practice and an opportunity for the kids to play in front of a crowd and have some fun. We won't see the new offense and the teams will be split up, but enjoy the game and don't let it get you too excited or disappointed. It's going to be fun to watch though, if for no other reason than we get our first glimpse of Bryce Underwood in the big house. He and Jaden Davis are the only two quarterbacks right now, so you will see a lot of them on Saturday. The goal, as always with this game, is to have fun and not get anyone hurt. My guest today says he's looking forward to Saturday, but knows we can't take much away from what we'll see on the field. Up next is beat writer Aaron McMann from MLive. So stay with us. Joining us on the show today is beat writer Aaron McMann from MLive to talk a little Michigan football. It's been a while, Aaron. Great to have you back with us.
It's good to be back, Mike. Football season's around the corner. We're almost done with spring practice, and before you know it, the season will be here.
Yeah, and everyone's excited. We're just days away from the spring game, and as I said, everyone gets amped up about it this time of the year, especially thinking what the team might be in the fall, given the high note the season ended on with wins over Ohio State and Alabama. But the thing we hear about most, it seems, from fans and media is Bryce Underwood. From what we hear, he's lighting it up in practice, but man, are the expectations through the roof for this kid or what?
Yeah, it's hard to compare it to anything else.
Yeah.
I remember when Shea Patterson first got here years ago, and there was a lot of hype around him and everything else, but this is a little bit different, right? Bryce is a true freshman. He was a five-star recruit, number one player in the freshman class this past season. So there's a lot of expectations on him. And then not only that, but you throw the money part into it now with NIL and everything else going on. So the weight of the world in ways on his shoulders, to be fair or not, it's a reality situation. So, and you throw in the fact that Michigan needs, better play quarterback this fall. And yeah, I mean, all eyes will be on him Saturday. There's no doubt about it. I mean, he's been the talk of the program really since he signed back in December. His recruitment was interesting. His play he's a very good quarterback. He was very good in high school. He looks the part right now. He looks like someone who could come in right away and play and start a football game. And right now, at least, from what we're hearing and what we're being told, it certainly seems to be trending that way for the fall.
Well, because of the injuries to Mikey Keene and Davis Warren, who's recovering from surgery, Bryce and then Jaden Davis, they're really getting all of the reps in practice. And Bryce Underwood, has not played a down, as we know, in a real game yet. And really none of the media has been able to see him play in person yet. But the only ones we hear about are from his teammates, and they seem to think the world of him, don't they?
Yeah, we've heard a lot this spring about his arm and ball placement, and just kind of the intangibles of an elite quarterback. It's something we really haven't seen in a while here at Michigan. You go back a while. I mean, even the last couple of years, Michigan has just kind of basically struggled. Aside from J.J. McCarthy through the first couple of years, they struggled. They really struggled at quarterback last year. So they're I think desperate for elite quarterback play. And I mentioned J.J. And it's funny because just in talking to people about Bryce, just off the field, not just his play, but just his his camaraderie with his teammates and his likability and his team first attitude. There are a lot of parallels to J.J. McCarthy. Now, J.J. didn't really play much his true freshman year, and Michigan kind of slow rolled him a little bit out there. That may not be the case for Bryce, as I was saying. He may get the reps week one. So a lot of reps going him in spring. It's basically him and Jaden Davis, to my understanding. I got to think Mikey Keene will be more of a factor this summer and going into the fall. And certainly push Bryce just based on his experience and his playing at this level. But right now, the fact that Bryce has gotten so many reps in spring practice more so than probably normal in normal circumstances. I got to think, he's got to be the front runner heading into week one.
Well, word out of camp has also been that Jaden Davis has made improvements this spring, and I think some fans are surprised he hasn't jumped into the portal given the expectations surrounding Underwood. But what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, there's a lot of curiosity around Jaden Davis. Even as Michigan's going through the quarterback carousel last year, there are a lot of people or fans wondering why haven't we seen Jaden Davis? Part of it was I think Michigan was destined to redshirt him anyway. They didn't really want to throw him out there and necessarily get his feet wet and him stumble and not play particularly well, and then risk whatever else happening. So he's now had a full year under his belt. There were some concerns about his throwing, his mechanics, some of his mechanics, even going into his freshman year. It sounds like they've worked on that a little bit. The pitch and the throw, I think, is still there to some degree, but he's got a full year under his belt now. He's got plenty of reps this spring, aside from next to Bryce. So this is, in a way, it's kind of go time for him. It's his time to kind of show that he can play at this level and be a functional backup, if needed. We'll see where things go. I'm really curious to see how he looks in the spring game. Everyone's going to be looking at Bryce, and rightfully so, but Jaden Davis will, be getting his share of snaps and opportunities as well. So as things stand right now, with Keene out, Jaden Davis is number 2 on the depth chart. So it's an opportunity for him to step up and show that he can be a Big Ten level a quarterback. So we'll find out here as things move on, what ends up happening with him. But right now, they're counting on him. They have to.
Well, there has been some talk that Michigan will look or might look for a quarterback in the portal, given they have 4 on the roster when everyone is healthy. So do you think that's likely?
Yeah, it's a good question. I got to think, if the injury to Mikey Keene is concerning, and I haven't gotten any indication that it really is. They're just not worried about it. It's preventative more than anything going into the fall. But, if there is some major issue with Keene and they're concerned, yeah, it would not shock me at all if they turn to the portal. There's been some interesting names enter the last couple of weeks. Brendan Sullivan, who was for a brief time the starter at Iowa last year, played Northwestern before that. He maybe could be an option. You look at Mike Wright, just entered into the transfer portal from Vanderbilt. He played Northwestern before as well. So there are some names out there. The problem for Michigan is, you've got a 5-star freshman on the roster. Everyone knows who Bryce Underwood is, and the assumption is he's probably going to be, if he's not going to be the starter this fall, he's certainly going to get an opportunity. So, if you look for a more veteran quarterback in the portal, you got to somehow convince them to come here and be okay with, potentially being a backup or a third string. Kind of like a Jack Tuttle last year, or an Alan Bowman the year before that. And when that happens, the pool shrinks quite a bit, especially for guys who are looking to play and are looking to start.
Well, the offensive line, according to reports, has been improving, but still has to be, I would think, a great area of concern for this team. Offensive linemen are going at a premium in the portal right now, and given that fact, do you think Michigan has to bolster depth on the line?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's hard to answer that without seeing practice. I can tell you that, they've got a lot of inexperience there at the tackle spots. We saw quite a bit of Evan Link last year at right tackle. I think that was kind of out of necessity more than anything. We hear it from the Michigan coaches all the time, but ideally they don't like to play, underclassmen or freshmen or redshirt freshmen, along the lines early on. It just, from a physicality standpoint, it doesn't usually work out. And look, Link was to his defense. He was playing kind of out of position last year. He's better at left tackle. He told us that last week. That's where he's more comfortable. And that's where Michigan has moved him this spring. And then that's where they seem, destined to have him play. And then you've got Andrew Sprague, again, another redshirt freshman, hasn't played a ton. He's, penciled in to potentially start this fall. And then, yeah, you got a group of guys behind them are either inexperienced or early in their college playing career. So it wouldn't shock me, if they do turn the portal and get some help, especially at tackle. I think they feel pretty good about the guard spots with Giovanni Ohadi back, and they really like Nathan Afobe. It sounds like he's kind of next in line there at guard. But center's a question mark too. Greg Crippen is back. He didn't start the entirety of last year. Part of it was due to injury. Part of it was, I think, struggles on the field. So, they could dip in the portal if the price is right and the right guys are there. It sounds like they may be pursuing a tackle or two here. They did add, the Brady Norton kid from Cal Poly of the FCS level a couple of months back. I'm curious to see how he translates to this type of play. And he's another option at tackle as well. But right now, they've got a lot of inexperienced, unproven guys. And it would probably behoove them to go in and get somebody more experienced, some guy that you kind of plug in and know what you're going to get on a drive-to-drive basis.
Well, I think a lot of us are in wait and see mode with the receiver room too. I mean, Donovan McCulley, he should be an upgrade, joining Fred Moore and Samaj Morgan, and then some talented freshmen we have coming in. Do you feel pretty good about that group, or do you think that also is a position group that Michigan is eyeing the portal for help?
Yeah, I feel better about it, compared to this time last year. I mean, this time last year, they were working with only a handful of really scholarship bodies in that room.
Yeah.
McCauley's an intriguing guy. He played very well in Indiana a couple of years ago, put up some big numbers, and kind of showed his potential, what he could be. He didn't play a ton last year, so he hasn't played a lot of football over the last, 18 to 24 months. I'm curious to see how he looks. But by all accounts, Michigan's kind of treating him as kind of the number one at this point. He's going to be the primary outside option. Certainly got the athleticism to do it. And look, part of the problem with the receivers last year, I'm not going to put all the blame on them. You had as we just talked about, an inexperienced offensive line. You had a quarterback play that was certainly below average, so that doesn't help the situation. So I think if you can certainly upgrade the quarterback play, whether it's Bryce or Mikey Keene or whoever ends up starting, I think that by and large, kind of by default, will help the receiver room. And look, there's no doubt about it. Michigan's expecting more from Samaj Morgan, Fred Moore. They got C.J. Charleston back, the transfer from Youngstown State. So there are options there. I think they feel better about the receiver room coming into this year. And I think as long as the quarterback play can improve and the offensive line can protect him, I think you're going to see a little bit more explosion from this offense.
Well, one position group that seems pretty well set to me is in the running back room. Not a ton of experience, though, but there is sure a lot of promise in that room, isn't there, Aaron?
Yeah, and a lot of guys are kind of proving themselves, right? Like Michigan brought in Justice Haynes from Alabama. He was kind of their second running back, but really their third ball carrier, because he was kind of fighting for carries with Jalen Milroe last year, their run heavy quarterback. So he was, I think, looking for an opportunity to come in and just get more opportunities and more carries, and I think he's going to get it this year. My indication, he's probably going to be the number one back, this fall. But Jordan Marshall's going to get an opportunity as well. I mean, we got a good look at him against Alabama there in the LyQuest Bowl. Fairly efficient. He was fine. With 20 plus carries, and he was. He's got leadership capabilities and qualities about him. So. Michigan's certainly going to lean on those two. We thought Ben Hall would be in the mix as well. Turns out he's entering the transfer portal. So that's going to, leave the room a little less deep, more shallow than we expected.
Mm-hmm.
Micah Capon is also available there. We didn't see a ton of him last year. But just listening to some of the players talk about this new offense and what Chip Lindsey wants to do, it sounds like they want to get the running backs more involved in the passing game. So that will be something to watch. Capon, I think, would be good in that area. But if they deal with an injury here early, whether it's in camp or early in the season, that may be concerning for the running backs, especially if you want to run the football. I don't think Sharon's necessarily going away from the smash mouth style of play that Michigan's become known for. So they're going to have to lead on the running backs this year. And on paper, Justice Haynes and I think Jordan Marshall can get it done. But I think you'd like to see have a third reliable back there as well.
Well, one of the questions I get a lot from fans is about the tight end position. I'm not too worried about it. We saw a lot of kids last year in the spring game, not so much getting time during the regular season. So again, not a world of experience at that position, but there are some talented, big, young tight ends, aren't there?
Yeah, and I think you're going to see a couple of them kind of used quite a bit. It's not going to be a situation where, like last year, where Colston Loveland gets the bulk of the targets, or a few years earlier, Luke Schoonmaker having a big year. I think you're going to see Marlon Klein quite a bit. You're going to see Hogan Hansen quite a bit. I think they're probably going to split reps. And look, I don't know if they're going to use a tight end as much as they have in the past. I mean, don't get me wrong, they're still going to use the tight end, and it's still part of Michigan's DNA and identity, but it sounds like they want to use the running backs more in the passing game. They want to use more of the receivers, and they just frankly have more receivers available to them this year as well. So, I think you're going to see both of those guys used quite a bit. Klein will be interesting to watch, just because we've heard a lot about him the last couple of years. Just his athleticism and his speed and everything else hasn't necessarily translated some of the targets. He did have his moments last year. Now, some of that was him just kind of being overshadowed, I think, by Loveland a little bit. But we did see bits and pieces of Hansen last year. I'm intrigued by him. I think he could be very good. It wouldn't shock me at all if we're talking this time next year and Hanson, is coming off a big year, has a bright future. So it'll probably be more by committee, is my guess, at the tight ends as opposed to, the previous couple of years.
Well, there's no doubt a lot of excitement to see what the changes that Chip Lindsey is going to bring to the offense, but I'm sure we won't see many of them on Saturday. I think we can guarantee that. But despite his reputation, it sounds like he still wants the running game to be the bread and butter of this offense, doesn't he?
Yeah, I mean, when Sharon got the job a couple of years ago, he made it pretty apparent that he wasn't going to necessarily go away from the smash mouth identity. They still want to dominate the line of scrimmage. They still want to run the football, and it plays into I think what Chip wants to do. They do want to throw the ball more. They want to be more explosive down the field, and to do that, you have to establish the line of scrimmage and run the football. Michigan struggled at times doing that last year. There were games where they did it very well, but they needed more consistency, right? They need better play from the line. They need to hit the gaps and more explosive runs. Now they have a brand new running back room, as we discussed. I'm really curious to see what they look like. Maybe as opposed to like a Donovan Edwards type who would break those big plays, and a Colin Mullings who you knew what you were going to get on a daily basis. So I think they're still learning, I think, about their running backs. As I said, they're going to lean on them, and we'll see in how much capacity, but the opportunity, no doubt, I think will be there.
Well, flipping over to the other side of the ball, all of us, I think, were impressed with a lot of the young guys on defense and what they did against a very good Bama offense in the bowl game. Wink Martindale seems very confident, at least from what he's saying this spring, that this is going to be another very good defense, especially the D-line and linebacker positions. I don't think any of us are saying as good as we've seen the last 4 years, but they seem to be in a really good place up front and at the backer positions, don't they?
Yeah, the depth, I think, is what Wink's most excited about. He was talking several times last year about how they didn't feel like they had enough guys at certain spots. I think one of the reasons why you saw Kenneth Grant and Mason Graham play so many snaps last year, yes, they were very good, but they didn't have a ton of reliability behind them. This year it's a different story. I mean, they've got, again, they feel like they've got 2 or 4 edge rushers that they can lean on a regular basis. They've got 6 defensive tackles they can lean on. Lou Esposito was talking a few weeks ago about sending D tackles and waves this year, and I think that's kind of the plan, to kind of let off the gas with some of these guys, not overwork them during games, and kind of revert back to how Michigan played a couple of years ago, right? In the defense, where they felt like they had 2 sets of group players they could send in and not see a drop-off. So the depth is the sticking point here. I don't know if the high-level talent is going to be there, like a Will Johnson, like a Mason Graham, but you've got enough, I think, experience and enough talent, really all 3 levels, to make this thing work.
Well, if there is an area of concern, though, it's probably the back end at corner and the safeties. There are question marks there, aren't there, Aaron?
Yeah, there are. You got Jair Hill back. He was up and down year last year, as we all know. He had some off the field issues and everything else, but I think Michigan's expecting, leaps an improvement from him. It sounds like he's matured a little bit and grown up, and I think that's what they're counting on. And he had his moments last year. I think against inferior play, inferior opponents, he played well, but it was a high level competition where he really struggled. So I think if they can get him in better mentality, he's been around a year now. I think they're expecting a bigger leap from him. The other core spot's more the question mark, right? They don't know who they're going to play there. The end of the year last year with Zeke Berry, and I thought Zeke was almost a better corner than he was a nickel. And so I'm curious to see if that's where they end up putting him. They've been trying him out at multiple spots. If they don't do that, then you've got to lean on a group of guys who have been in and out, a bunch of transfers. So that's going to be the question mark. I think Zeke probably ultimately sticks there just because that's probably their best option, but they've got some figuring out to do, and they've got several months to do it.
Well, as we are well aware now, Aaron, the portal has changed roster construction, probably forever, if not for a long time, and it's going to happen from year to year. Are you surprised by any of the current Michigan players who decided to jump in the portal?
Not really. I mean, it's generally look, this time of the year, especially this spring, you're seeing a lot of guys coming in and out. Guys who are maybe they've been told they're not starting. Guys who are maybe second or third in the depth chart, so they're looking for opportunities elsewhere. And it makes sense, right? If you're given the opportunity to do it, they're going to go. The one name, if I had to pick one name, it'd probably be Ben Hall. He's a guy who, we just spoke with last week. He sounded like he was willing to stick around. He had lost some weight to try and fit into Chip Lindsey's system, or his offensive system, and he seemed like he was ready to go this year. And yet he decides to, enter the portal. So something tells me he was probably told he was either third or fourth on the depth chart. And look, if you're in that situation, you have the right to go, and guys are doing it. So generally, no. I mean, most of these guys are, that do leave it's a depth issue when it comes down to. So generally, no.
Well, I know recruiting is not your thing, but along with spring practice, it's a hot topic right now, and we've heard a lot about some of the really big-time talent that's been visiting campus over the last couple of weeks, last couple of months, really. No commits. It's been slow, especially for the class of 26. Do you expect that is going to change after the spring game in the coming months?
Yeah, just anecdotally, going into Schembeckler Hall for media availability this spring, we're seeing just more and more guys coming in and out of there than normal. There's always the visits and everything else, but it seems like every time we go in there, there's dozens of lanyards with names on them from recruits who are visiting. So you remember Michigan got off to a slow start recruiting last year. I remember this time last year, folks were wondering what was going on. Why weren't they getting enough recruits? Why wasn't Sharon landing some of the big fish? And it took them a while to get going. I do wonder if the NCAA investigations are hanging over the program or having an effect, but you got to remember, in this day and age, with recruiting and NIL and now revenue sharing coming in, it's not necessarily how you start; it's how you finish. Because a lot of the times, if you land a high level recruit or even recruits in general this time of year, you not only are you landing them, but you have to try and protect them from other programs trying to steal them away. So we'll see how they finish. Going into the summer, if it's still slow, then there might be some cause for concern. But right now, it's you're still trying to feel. They're trying to feel recruits out, see where they're at, and they'll make their move because a lot of jostling at this point, especially when money's involved.
Exactly. Well, final question before we let you get away, Aaron. The spring game, as we know, is this Saturday. It's always something fans look forward to. It doesn't mean what you think it does, but it's fun. It's our last look at the team before they tee it up for real in the fall. Now, it's not going to be televised live this year, but delayed a week and then shown on BTN. And the reason being given is because the portal is still open. Explain to listeners why it's being done that way.
Yeah, you're seeing more, and folks maybe not paying attention or just don't really care. You're seeing a lot more college programs nowadays, either not do their spring game or alter their spring game, or in some cases not have their spring game televised. Because there's concern over tampering. Coaches are worried that other schools might get a hold of the film and look at it more closely than normal and try and find some players that they could potentially poach heading into the fall. It's happened before. Coaches are always worried about this type of stuff. And that's the way Michigan's kind of going about this. We're seeing more and more schools just not have their spring game at all. Sharon said he didn't want to do that. He still wanted to hold it because in some cases, this is the only opportunity for some of these guys to play in the big house. And then look, it's a free event for the fans that they get to come out and enjoy the day and meet some of the players and watch some football. So it's really a win-win for everyone. And I don't think Sharon wanted to take that away. But the TV piece is the key one, right? Because usually the game airs live on Big Ten Network. I think last year, 2 years ago, it was live on Fox. So Michigan's choosing to wait. And it's going to air the following Sunday morning, I believe, at 11 a.m. It'll be 2 days after the spring window for the transfer portal closes. So there won't be an opportunity for any more Michigan's players to enter the portal at that point, and thus Michigan not losing anyone else. So smart move, really. It's not something I really thought about, to be honest with you. One that, it makes sense.
Yeah, it's a smart move. Might get a few more people in the seats for a spring game. Crowds aren't always out of this world for spring games at Michigan, so we'll wait and see. But again, it's the last time to see the kids before we tee it up for real in the fall, or wait until next weekend and watch it on BTN. So we've been talking with beat writer Aaron McMann from MLive, getting our spring update. Even though spring football will be over this week, recruiting and anticipation for the coming season will continue and build to a crescendo in the summer. So, Aaron, we'll have plenty of opportunities to get together again, and we look forward to another visit very soon.
Thanks, Mike.
On Quick Hits today, sad news this week as we learned of the passing of Mike DeBoard. He was an offensive line coach under Lloyd Carr and also the offensive coordinator for the '97 national champions. The praise and kind words for Coach DeBoard have been pouring in this week from his former players and anyone who worked with him at his many stops in college football. So rest in peace, Coach DeBoard. If you aren't at the game in person this week, you can hear all of the action on the radio if you're in Michigan. If you live outside of the state, you can still listen to all of the action on the Varsity Network app. It's free from iTunes and the Google Play Store. If you want to see the game, you'll have to wait until next Sunday morning at 11 a.m. on BTN. As Aaron and I discussed in our interview segment, the delay is because Michigan does not want other schools poaching players before the portal closes next Thursday. A lot of schools, as I'm sure you're well aware, have canceled their spring game for that very reason. If you have any comments or suggestions on Michigan football or anything else maize and blue, you can email me at the Michigan Man Podcast at yahoo.com. That's the Michigan Man Podcast at yahoo.com. Or leave a message or question on our listener line at 313-351-2631. That's 313-351-2631. Just tell us who you are, where you're calling from, and then leave a message. That does it for now. Have a great Wolverine week, everyone, and a very happy Easter to each and every one of you. I'm your host, Mike Fitzpatrick. Until we meet again, take care, and as always, go blue.
Thanks for joining us today on The Michigan Man, here on Wolverine Sports Radio, a member of the V Sporto Network, and in partnership with SB Nation's Maize and Brew. Our listener lines are open 24/7 for your calls at 313-263-4842. That's 313-263-4842. Or email us at the Michigan Man Podcast at yahoo.com. That's the Michigan Man Podcast at yahoo.com. The Michigan Man Podcast is produced at the studios of Robin Lynn Productions, Allen Park, Michigan, and is not affiliated with the University of Michigan. Go Blue!